Hello, everyone. Good evening and welcome to tonight's stream. This is your vampire Oneesama Sister Midnight here with you this Saturday evening. Let's spend another quiet evening together. But before we start with our stories for this evening, I just want to greet everyone in chat. Good evening, Mr. Nanya Dem Business. Thank you for the 10 bites. Canolas for the 53 bites. And thank you as well for I forgot how many. For the tier 3 sub for 49 months. I appreciate the support. Thank you very much. Luxus 420. I don't know if the 420 refers to what I think it is, but thank you for dropping by, and I appreciate the lurk. Furlu, good evening, good evening. Thank you for the 34 bites. Is it 34 bites? I think it is. And of course, Luxus as well for the 2 bites. Thank you guys so much for allowing yourself to be bitten to sustain your Oneesama's lifespan. Because for every moment, or I guess not every moment, but for every stream that your Oneesama is not able to get the precious sustenance that she needs, her lifespan decreases just a tiny bit more. So thank you guys. Also, Tony, over on the red platform on YouTube, we'll call it that. If Twitch decides to ban me for that, then so be it. Welcome in, welcome in. Hello over there. Okay, so I was well, like any modern person, I was doom scrolling through Twitter this evening, and I came across a post about consequences, something about freedom of choice does not mean freedom from consequences. And it made me realize that the choices that we make, whether it be the smallest one, the most inconsequential ones, the ones that we think does not really matter, may have lasting consequences down the line. As human beings, one of the things that God provided us, well, if you believe in a higher being, that is, was free will, the ability to choose. But there is a caveat to that. That free will, that ability to choose, to make decisions for ourselves, does not mean that we are free from the consequences of those decisions. And so I decided that our stories for this evening will revolve around consequences. Hello, Dex. Good evening, and welcome to the stream. First blood 16 times. Congratulations. And for the 40 bites, nobody redeemed first. Nobody. I think they forgot. Also, because I keep forgetting to put an alert for the first reward. I should probably put an animation alert for that. But because we are in an ASMR stream, I disabled alerts and walk on alerts as well, just so you guys know. Okay. Okay, so I have several stories that I have chosen for this evening's stream, and in some form or another, they deal with consequences, with choices. So they are, they're choices that involve various aspects of our lives, or of a person's life, I guess. So these stories some of them might be a little bit triggering for some. So if you are the kind who might get traumatized by certain aspects, if you feel when you're listening to the story and you feel that you're not comfortable with what you're hearing, please feel free to click away, alright? I would never ask you to stay and force yourself to listen to the story if it is something that is triggering you or is causing you distress, alright? I can bite you so that you can relax somewhat, because my bite has that particular effect, but it can only hold so much power. So again, prioritize yourself, okay? Your Oneesama will still be here on the next stream and on the next time you visit. Lineage, good evening. How are you doing? I'm very happy to see a familiar face, familiar name. Welcome in. Good evening. I hope you are doing well and welcome back. Okay, so I have prepared 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 stories. Some of them are a little, how to say, they're a little emotional. So if you hear your Oneesama cry, that's because she got affected by the story. So don't be surprised, okay? Five today. Don't worry, these stories are pretty short, which is why there's 5 of them. Okay, so I will also, I have prepared some drinks to make sure that I don't my throat is going to be okay. All right. So we have we are in the fireplace, not the fireplace, but in the library once again. So I am going to put on this, and we're going to reduce our background music, of course. And here we are. Okay, so before we start, how is the audio? Because the last time I listened to my own stream, I could barely hear the background audio. And as much as, I want you guys to be listening to my voice, I also want to have the ambience of in this case the fireplace, and of course the somber music in the background. Fire crackling. How about alright, how about that? How about the music? There is music in there somewhere. So tell me if you can hear the music or not. Can you guys hear? Or is I need to know if yes, that one, not music, I guess. The somber. Okay, so you can hear that. And it's not overpowering my voice, yes? Hopefully. Okay, so as you can see, I have my whip with me because this is me bringing the consequences to you. Let's just put it that way. Okay. So our first story for this evening is a classic story by William Faulkner. This was a story that I studied as well during my college days when I was studying English literature. So this particular story is about a tragic love consequence. Something about the horrifying results of desperate, clinging love and denial. So, I hope you're ready. If you have read this story already, back in, I don't know, maybe high school, I don't really know. But if you have read this, then feel free to follow along. The title of the story is A Rose for Emily by William Faulkner. When Miss Emily Grierson died, our whole town went to her funeral. the man through a sort of respectful affection for a fallen monument. The women mostly out of curiosity to see the inside of her house, which no one, save an old manservant, a combined gardener and cook, had seen in at least 10 years. It was a big, squarish frame house that had once been white, decorated with cupolas and spires and scrolled balconies in the heavily lightsome style of the 70s, set on what had once been our most select street. But garages and cotton gins had encroached and obliterated even the august names of that neighborhood. Only Miss Emily's house was left, lifting its stubborn and coquettish decay above the cotton wagons and the gasoline pumps, an eyesore among eyesores. And now Miss Emily had gone to join the representatives of those august names, where they lay in the cedar-bemused cemetery among the ranked and anonymous graves of Union and Confederate soldiers who fell at the Battle of Jefferson. Alive, Miss Emily had been a tradition, a duty, and a care, a sort of hereditary obligation upon the town, dating from that day in 1894, when Colonel Sartoris, the mayor, he who fathered the edict that no black woman should appear in the streets without an apron, remitted her taxes, the dispensation dating from the death of her father on into perpetuity. Not that Miss Emily would have accepted charity. Colonel Sartoris invented an involved tale to the effect that Miss Emily's father had loaned money to the town, which the town, as a matter of business, preferred this way of repaying. Only a man of Colonel Sartoris's generation and thought could have invented it, and only a woman could have believed it. When the next generation, with its more modern ideas, became mayors and aldermen, this arrangement created some little dissatisfaction. On the first of the year, they mailed her a tax notice. February came, and there was no reply. They wrote her a formal letter, asking her to call at the sheriff's office at her convenience. A week later, the mayor wrote her himself, offering to call or to send his car for her, and received a reply in a note of paper of an archaic shape, in a thin, flowing calligraphy in faded ink, to the effect that she no longer went out at all. The tax notice was also enclosed, without comment. They called a special meeting of the Board of Aldermen. A deputation waited upon her, knocked at the door through which no visitor had passed since she ceased giving china painting lessons 8 or 10 years earlier. They were admitted by the employee into a dim hall from which a stairway mounted into still more shadow. It smelled of dust and disuse, a close, dank smell. The employee led them into the parlor. It was furnished in a heavy, leather-covered furniture. When he opened the blinds of one window, they could see that the leather was cracked, and when they sat down, a faint dust rose sluggishly about their thighs, spinning with slow motes in a single sun ray. On a tarnished gilt easel before the fireplace stood a crayon portrait of Miss Emily's father. They rose when she entered, a small fat woman in black, with a thin gold chain descending to her waist and vanishing into her belt, leaning on an ebony cane with a tarnished gold head. Her skeleton was small and spare. Perhaps that was why what would have been merely plumpness in another was obesity in her. She looked bloated, like a body long submerged in motionless water, and of that pallid hue. Her eyes, lost in the fatty ridges of her face, looked like two small pieces of coal pressed into a lump of dough as they moved from one face to another while the visitors stated their errand. She did not ask them to sit. She just stood in the door and listened quietly until the spokesman came to a stumbling halt, and they could hear the invisible watch ticking at the end of the gold chain. Her voice was dry and cold. "I have no taxes in Jefferson. Colonel Sartoris explained it to me. Perhaps one of you can gain access to the city records and satisfy yourselves." "But we have. We are the city authorities, Miss Emily. Didn't you get a notice from the sheriff, signed by him?" "I received a paper, yes," Miss Emily said. "Perhaps he considers himself the sheriff. I have no taxes in Jefferson." "But there's nothing on the books to show that. You see, we must go by the C. Colonel Sartoris. I have no taxes in Jefferson." "But Miss Emily, C. Colonel Sartoris." Colonel Sartoris had been dead almost 10 years. "I have no taxes in Jefferson." "Toby," the employee appeared, "show this gentleman out." So she vanquished them, horse and foot, just as she had vanquished their fathers 30 years before about the smell. That was 2 years after her father's death, and a short time after her sweetheart, the one we believed would marry her, had deserted her. After her father's death, she went out very little. After her sweetheart went away, people hardly saw her at all. A few of the ladies had the temerity to call, but were not received. And the only sign of life about the place was the employee, a young man then, going in and out with a market basket. Just as if a man, any man, could keep a kitchen properly, the ladies said. So they were not surprised when the smell developed. It was another link between the gross, teeming world and the high and mighty Griersons. A neighbor, a woman, complained to the mayor, Judge Stevens, 80 years old. But what will you have me do about it, madam? He said. Why, send her word to stop it, the woman said. Isn't there a law? I'm sure that won't be necessary, Judge Stevens said. It's probably just a snake or a rat that employee of hers killed in the yard. I'll speak to him about it. The next day, he received 2 more complaints. One from a man who came in diffident deprecation. We really must do something about it, Judge. I'd be the last one in the world to bother Miss Emily, but we've got to do something. That night, the board of aldermen met. 3 graybeards and 1 younger man, a member of the rising generation. It's simple enough, he said. Send her word to have her place cleaned up. Give her a certain time to do it in, and if she don't... Damn it, sir, Judge Stevens said. Will you accuse a lady to her face of smelling bad? Okay, I'm just gonna break. I'm gonna break immersion here for a little bit, but I know that it would be considered, even now in modern times, I feel like it would be considered an affront. It would be considered one of the greatest insult that you can tell a woman. If you tell her that she smells bad. So there you have it. Let's continue. So the next night, after midnight, 4 men crossed Miss Emily's lawn and slunk about the house like burglars, sniffing along the base of the brickwork and at the cellar openings, while one of them performed a regular sewing motion with his hand out of a sack slung from his shoulder. They broke open the cellar door and sprinkled lime there and in all the outbuildings. As they recrossed the lawn, a window that had been dark was lighted, and Miss Emily sat in it, the light behind her, and her upright torso motionless as that of an idol. They crept quietly across the lawn and into the shadow of the locusts that lined the street. After a week or 2, the smell went away. That was when people had begun to feel really sorry for her. People in our town, remembering how old Lady Wyatt, her great aunt, had gone completely crazy at last, believed that the Griersons held themselves a little too high for what they really were. None of the young men were quite good enough for Miss Emily and such. We had long thought of them as a tableau, Miss Emily a slender figure in white in the background, her father a spraddled silhouette in the foreground, his back to her and clutching a horsewhip, the 2 of them framed by the back-flung front door. So when she got to be 30 and was still single, we were not pleased exactly, but vindicated. Even with insanity in the family, she wouldn't have turned down all of her chances if they had really materialized. Hello, Jones. Happy birthday to you as well, and thank you for the 41 bites. Hello, Gecko. Thank you for the 41 bites as well. When her father died, it got about that the house was all that was left to her. And in a way, people were glad. At last, they could pity Miss Emily. Being left alone and a pauper, she had become humanized. Now she too would know the old thrill and the old despair of a penny more or less. The day after his death, all the ladies prepared to call at the house and offer condolence and aid. As is our custom, Miss Emily met them at the door, dressed as usual and with no trace of grief on her face. Hello, Mothy Danger, welcome in. No worries, Gecko. She told them that her father was not dead. She did that for 3 days, with the ministers calling on her and the doctors trying to persuade her to let them dispose of the body. I'm glad. Thank you for listening. Feel free to relax and listen. Just as they were about to resort to law and force, she broke down, and they buried her father quickly. This should give you an inkling as to what we can expect to see down the line. We did not say she was crazy then. We believed she had to do that. We remembered all the young men her father had driven away, and we knew that with nothing left, she would have to cling to that which had robbed her, as people will. She was sick for a long time. When we saw her again, her hair was cut short, making her look like a girl with a vague resemblance to those angels in collared church windows. Sort of tragic and serene. The town had just left the contracts for paving the sidewalks, and in the summer after her father's death, they began to work. The construction company came with riggers and mules and machinery, and a foreman named Homer Barron, a Yankee, a big, dark, ruddy man with a big voice and eyes lighter than his face. The little boys would follow in groups to hear him cuss the riggers, and the riggers singing in time to the rise and fall of picks. Pretty soon he knew everybody in town. Whenever you heard a lot of laughing anywhere about the square, Homer Barron would be in the center of the group. Presently, we began to see him and Miss Emily on Sunday afternoons, driving in the yellow-wheeled buggy and a matched team of bays from the livery stable. At first we were glad that Miss Emily would have an interest, because the ladies all said, of course a Grierson would not think seriously of a northerner, a day laborer. But there were still others, older people, who said that even grief could not cause a real lady to forget noblesse oblige without calling it noblesse oblige. They just said, poor Emily, her kinsfolk should have come to her. She had some kin in Alabama, but years ago her father had fallen out with him over the estate of old Lady Wyatt, the crazy woman, and there was no communication between the two families. They had not even been represented at the funeral. As soon as the old people said, "Poor Emily," the whispering began. "Do you suppose it's really so?" they said to one another. "Of course it is. What else could—" This behind their hands, rustling of craned silk and satin behind jalousies closed upon the sun a Sunday afternoon, as a thin, swift clop, clop, clop of the matched team passed by. Poor Emily. She carried her head high enough, even when we believed that she was fallen. It was as if she demanded more than ever the recognition of her dignity as the last Grierson, as if it had wanted that touch of earthiness to reaffirm her imperviousness. Like when she bought the rat poison, the arsenic. That was over a year after they had begun to say, "Poor Emily," and while the two female cousins were visiting her. "I want some poison," she said to the druggist. She was over 30 then, still a slight woman, though thinner than usual, with cold, haughty black eyes in a face the flesh of which was strained across the temples and about the eye sockets, as you imagine a lighthouse keeper's face ought to look. "I want some poison," she said. "Yes, Miss Emily, what kind? For rats and such, I want the best you have. I don't care what kind." The druggist named several. "They'll kill anything up to an elephant, but what you want is arsenic," Miss Emily said. "Is that a good one?" "Is arsenic?" "Yes, ma'am, but you want—" "I want arsenic." The druggist looked down at her. She looked back at him, erect, her face like a strained flag. "Why, of course," the druggist said, "if that's what you want. But the law requires you to tell what you're going to use it for." Miss Emily just stared at him, her head tilted back in order to look him eye for eye, until he looked away and went and got the arsenic and wrapped it up. The delivery boy brought her the package. The druggist didn't come back. When she opened it, the package at home, there was written on the box, under the skull and bones, "For rats." Now I'm going to break immersion here once again, and I'm going to feed you guys a little bit of a trivia that I learned from watching all those crime documentaries. I know you might think me a little bit crazy for listening to crime documentaries, but that is one of my ways of relaxing. But this little bit of trivia is that poison, or rather death by poison, is actually mostly a woman's choice or women's preference, I guess. Not, well, I guess choice would be a good word to use here, as we were talking about choices and consequence. But yes, apparently, death by poison is something that women often choose. It is 80% more likely to be picked, exactly, to be chosen by women. So that's another hint of what is waiting for us down the line. Hello, Agent 9. Welcome in, and thank you so much for the follow. So the next day, we all said she will kill herself. And we said it would be the best thing. When she had first begun to be seen with Homer Baron, we had said she will marry him. Then we said she will persuade him yet, because Homer himself had remarked he liked men, and it was known that he drank with the younger men in the Elks Club, that he was not a marrying man. Later we said, poor Emily. Behind the jealousies as they passed on Sunday afternoon in the glittering buggy, Miss Emily with her head high, and Homer Baron with his hat cocked and a cigar in his teeth, reins and a whip and a yellow glove. A whip. It depends what the task is to be killed, because there's a poison that mimics heart attack. And the point here, Gecko, is about the fact that poison is often a tool used by women. Then some of the ladies began to say that it was a disgrace to the town and a bad example to the young people. The men did not want to interfere, but at last the ladies forced the Baptist minister, Miss Emily's people were Episcopal, to call upon her. He would never divulge what happened during that interview, but he refused to go back again. The next Sunday, they again drove about the streets, and the following day, the minister's wife wrote to Miss Emily's relations in Alabama. Gentlemen, I would kindly ask that you stop talking about poison in chat, alright? I was merely stating something related to the story. So she had blood kin under her roof again, and we sat back to watch developments. At first, nothing happened. Thank you, I appreciate. Then we were sure that they were to be married. We learned that Miss Emily had been to the jeweler's and ordered a man's toilet set in silver with the letters HB on each piece. 2 days later, we learned that she had bought a complete outfit of men's clothing, including a nightshirt, and we said, they're married. We were really glad. We were glad because the 2 female cousins were even more Grierson than Miss Emily had ever been. So we were not surprised when Homer Barron, the streets had been finished some time since, was gone. We were a little disappointed that there was not a public blowing off, but we believed that he had gone on to prepare for Miss Emily's coming, or to give her a chance to get rid of the cousins. By that time it was a cabal, and we were all Miss Emily's allies to help circumvent the cousins. Sure enough, after another week, they departed, and as we had expected all along, within 3 days, Homer Barron was back in town. A neighbor saw the employee admit him at the kitchen door at dusk one evening. And that was the last we saw of Homer Barron and of Miss Emily for some time. The employee went in and out with a market basket, but the front door remained closed. Now and then we would see her at a window for a moment, as the man did that night when they sprinkled the lime. But for almost 6 months, she did not appear on the streets. Then we knew that this was to be expected too, as if that quality of her father, which had thwarted her woman's life so many times, had been too virulent and too furious to die. When we next saw Miss Emily, she had grown fat and her hair was turning gray. During the next few years, it grew grayer and grayer until it attained an even pepper and salt iron gray when it ceased turning. Up to the day of her death at 74, it was still that vigorous iron gray, like the hair of an active man. From that time on, her front door remained closed, save for a period of 6 or 7 years when she was about 40, during which she gave lessons in China painting. She fitted up a studio in one of the downstairs rooms, where the daughters and granddaughters of Colonel Sartoris's contemporaries were sent to her with the same regularity and in the same spirit that they were sent to church on Sundays, the 25-cent piece for the collection plate. Meanwhile, her taxes had been remitted. Then the newer generation became the backbone and the spirit of the town, and the painting pupils grew up and fell away, and did not send their children to her with boxes of color and tedious brushes and pictures cut from the ladies' magazines. The front door closed upon the last one and remained closed for good. When the town got free postal delivery, Miss Emily alone refused to let them fasten the metal numbers above her door and attach a mailbox to it. She would not listen to them. Daily, monthly, yearly, we watched the employee grow grayer and more stooped, going in and out with a market basket. Each December we sent her a tax notice, which would be returned by the post office a week later, unclaimed. Now and then we would see her in one of the downstairs windows. She had evidently shut up the top floor of the house, like the carven torso of an idol in a niche, looking or not looking at us. I could not tell which. Thus she passed from generation to generation, dear, inescapable, impervious, tranquil, and perverse. And so she died, fell ill in the house filled with dust and shadows, with only a doddering employee, a doddering old man to wait on her. We did not even know she was sick. He had long since given up trying to get any information from the employee. He talked to no one, probably not even to her, for his voice had grown harsh and rusty, as if from disuse. Hello, Meta. Thank you for the 38 bites. She died in one of the downstairs rooms, in a heavy walnut bed with a curtain, her gray head propped on a pillow, yellow and moldy with age and lack of sunlight. The old employee met the first of the ladies at the front door and let them in. With their hushed, sibilant voices and their quick, curious glances. And then he disappeared. He walked right through the house and out the back and was not seen again. The two female cousins came at once. They held the funeral on the second day, with the town coming to look at Miss Emily beneath a mass of bought flowers, the crane face of her father musing profoundly above the bier, and the ladies sibilant and macabre. And the very old men, some in their brushed Confederate uniforms, on the porch and the lawn, talking of Miss Emily as if she had been a contemporary of theirs, believing that they had danced with her and courted her, perhaps, confusing time with its mathematical progression, as the old do. To whom all the past is not a diminishing road, but instead a huge meadow which no winter ever quite touches, divided from them now by the narrow bottleneck of the most recent decade of years. Already we knew that there was one room in that region above stairs which no one had seen in 40 years, and which would have to be forced. They waited until Miss Emily was decently in the ground before they opened it. The violence of breaking down the door seemed to fill this room with pervading dust. A thin, acrid pall, as of the tomb, seemed to lie everywhere upon this room, decked and furnished as for a bridal. Upon the valance curtains of faded rose color, upon the rose-shaded lights, upon the dressing table, upon the delicate array of crystal, and the man's toilet things backed with tarnished silver. Silver so tarnished that the monogram was obscured. Among them lay a collar and a tie, as if they had just been removed, which lifted left upon the surface a pale crescent in the dust. Upon a chair hung the suit, carefully folded. Beneath it, the two mute shoes and the discarded socks. The man himself lay in the bed. For a long while we just stood there, looking down at the profound and fleshless grin. The body had apparently once lain in the attitude of an embrace. But now the long sleep that outlasts love, that conquers even the grimace of love, had cuckolded him. What was left of him, rotted beneath what was left of the nightshirt, had become inextricable from the bed in which he lay, and upon him and upon the pillow beside him lay that even coating of the patient and biting dust. Then we noticed that in the second pillow was the indentation of a head. One of us lifted something from it, and leaning forward, that faint and invisible dust, dry and acrid in the nostrils, we saw a long strand of iron gray hair. And that ends our first story for this evening. Have you guys been able to discern what happened? Based on what you have listened, I'm going to be Teacher Midnight for now. And I'm going to ask you if you understood what happened in the story A Rose for Emily. No? Nobody? Alright. At the last part, they saw a strand of gray hair on the pillow beside the dead body of a man lying on the bed. And who did I describe as a person that had iron gray hair even when she was already quite old, or even when she died? Remember at the very start, or I gave you hints. The first one being that Miss Emily refused to let go of her father's dead body, and it took 3 days before they could extricate his body and have it buried. Second, I talked about poison being a woman's choice. And then now, or the last one, is a description of Miss Emily when she died, and that she had iron gray hair when she died. So based on these 3 hints that I gave, you can now surmise or draw a conclusion as to what happened. There is also, by the way, the part of the story where Miss Emily bought outfits for a bridegroom. Yes, a bridegroom. It's a groom to be. Okay, a bridegroom is like it's more of it's a more classical way of describing the man who is about to get married. Nowadays, they're usually called groom to be, but in the olden days of literature, a man who is about to be married is called a bridegroom. So the TLDR of it, I like the old term better. I think so too. I actually like the word bridegroom a lot better than groom to be. So the TLDR of it is Miss Emily, in fear of being left alone. Remember when her father died, she was left by herself. Poisoned Homer Baron with arsenic. Laid him to, well, laid his body, I suppose, on the bed, dressed up in the outfit that she bought for, well, the prospective groom, I suppose. And with the indented pillow beside the dead body, one can draw the conclusion that every night since then, for 40 years, when Homer Baron disappeared, she lay in bed with his dead body. And that is a story for the Rose for Emily. Indeed, she was. So there you have it. That story is again about desperate, clinging love and denial, because I believe that Homer Baron had stated that he was not into women and that he was not the marrying kind. But Miss Emily wanted a man in her life. She had grown with a life with only her father for her companion, and now that he's gone, she was all by herself. And if she was not going to be able to get the man in the traditional way, she found a more dangerous and, well, insane way, as you put it. Okay, that is our first story. This one, the next story, is a bit more modern. I think the next 3 stories are modern, and then the last one is going to be another classical story. So this one is about the consequence of not following the rules. Unique way about it. I suppose it is unique in the sense that she chose to keep the body with her for the next 40 years. Because if she had not, Homer Baron would most likely have left her. Alright, so let me just drink some water first, okay? Let me mute myself a little bit. Wait, was I muted this whole time? Did you guys hear me when I was talking? Okay, I'm gonna mute myself now because I need to drink some water. Okay. Our next story is about family tradition and the consequence of breaking that particular tradition. Now remember, this is horror, so brace yourselves once again, okay? The title of the story: My family doesn't eat meat after 6 p.m. because of the consequence. My family doesn't eat meat after 6 p.m. I'd always thought this was normal, that other families followed this seemingly basic principle. It wasn't until I moved out that I learned how weird of a thing this was. That other families didn't adhere to what I'd always thought to be a fundamental dietary guideline. Only my family believed in the consequence. For nearly 2 decades, I refrained from eating meat after the clock struck 6, regardless of how much of a craving I happened to have for it. Even if there was plenty left and I hadn't finished my plate, I was expected to either scrape the remains into the trash, so much food wasted, or put it in a Tupperware container for the next day. I always tried to get home soon enough to eat dinner before then. But with school and extracurricular activities, that wasn't always possible. I remember when I just finished hosting a session for an after-school club and was on my way home, starving, hadn't eaten all day, when I got a text from my father saying that he had bundled all the meat up and to not expect any left out. He'd sent the text at 5:47 p.m. I arrived home feeling disappointed, but quickly got over it, as it was simply something that had to be done. It was, for us, normal. The fear of the consequence guided our lives. Because of how integral it was to my family, I had never once brought up the topic with friends. Much like how you probably wouldn't bring up the fact that you put your dishes in the sink or a dishwasher. It was never conversationally relevant to bring up our no meat after 6 rule. To me, it was mundane, unremarkable. It might sound like this was an odd, though ultimately harmless restriction, a familial eccentricity, which many families have in one way or another. And in one way, you're right. I wasn't abused. I slipped up once, and while it was treated gravely, given a stern, though not frighteningly heated warning, there was no traumatic punishment, physical or otherwise. There was some leniency in the exaction of the consequence with regards to children. But the consequence itself was so utterly bizarre, so needlessly grim, that its very existence made the whole thing unforgivable. I would have rather been raised vegan, lived a life bereft of meat for some allegedly noble cause, than the one I had. Because that knowledge, that ever-lurking fear, messed me up in other ways. I don't have PTSD, and neither do I have some psychological block preventing me from eating meat after 6 p.m. Thank God. But I do have knowledge of the consequences, and I do anything to forget it. Hello, little beastman 05 or 05. Welcome in, and thank you so much for the follow. When I shared that knowledge with my girlfriend, and how I still adhered to it, something she hadn't consciously noticed. She left me. And not only did she leave me, she called me a lunatic. Me, who had never once said anything certifiably crazy. Me, who treated her with care, respect, and kindness, with an unblemished record of staunch sanity. All because of the fucking consequence. She left yesterday, and in doing so, hello, Sasya. Should we have a, what do you call it? The curse jar? Curse word jar. Every time I say a curse word, I have to put a coin inside it. She left yesterday, and in doing so took all of her things from my apartment, which included most of the cookware, since she'd brought hers over in the absence of my own. I'd relied on the microwave and an air fryer prior to her moving in. Back to such lowly states, I bought a Hot Pocket after an unusually exhausting day at work. That olden dinner upon which many have relied throughout the ages. Cheeseburger flavor. Additionally, I bought a bag of those low-fat, air-fried chicken tenders to supplement the totally nutritious meal. I was physically tired and emotionally wrecked. I guess in the grief of my heartbreak, I had thought it worthwhile to share the events with my cousin during the drive home, with whom I'd always felt close. Brotherly connection. Well, he apparently felt it necessary to tell my parents after the call ended, who took it upon themselves to come visit me. While sitting at my small dinner table, eating my Hot Pocket and tendies, there came a few knocks at the door to my apartment. I got up, answered, and, bewildered, let my parents in. My mom hugged me. My dad gave me a knowing and solemn pat on the shoulder and told me in many words that I'd be fine, that I'd find someone better. Absent-mindedly, I brought them into the kitchen and offered them some tenders since I'd cooked the whole bag. I hadn't paid attention to the time. Ironically, hadn't thought of the one that had ended my relationship. My mom's face was the first to change. It went from sympathetically despondent to confused and then to horrified. My dad's reaction was a little belated, as if he couldn't quite fathom the events. His expression of fatherly contrition slowly melted into snarl, a visage of mounting contempt. Finally, glancing over at the microwave's clock, I realized what I'd done. Hello, Damon. Thank you so much for the 16 bites. Speechless, my mother merely stood at the threshold of the kitchen. My father, equally voiceless, gently pushed past her and headed toward the front door. I heard the lock click. And then he returned, his face grimly set, resolute. Stunned, I sat there at the table, the cheap meat turning in my gut. My plate, the half-eaten hot pocket and chicken tender crumbs, suddenly seemed like a profane thing. I wanted to sweep it off the table. After guiding my mother to a seat, my father went and leaned against the kitchen counter, his hands clasped together. He looked like a pastor in prayer, his posture almost reverent. A terrible, baleful silence fell upon the kitchen, like the sudden hush of an audience before a public execution. Oh, my son, my baby. My mother's shaky voice almost broke me. I met her eyes and she averted them, like she couldn't bear to look at me, her own son. One second. Alright, I'm back. My apologies. My throat decided to make itself felt. I tried to apologize, but my mouth was suddenly dry. The room suddenly felt hot, stifling. I couldn't seem to breathe, let alone form the words. Slowly, things started to feel wrong. Anxiety reared itself like a massive wave. Thank you, Tony. My vision swam, objects becoming blurred, indistinct, amorphous. My own parents became like phantoms, shifting and immaterial. I gripped the table for balance, for stability, as if I were the one losing corporeality. It's happening to my son. Oh my god. Rip Van, good evening. Welcome in and thank you for dropping by. I'd never heard my father sound so defeated. His voice almost brought me back, almost reversed the nauseating unreality of my sudden affliction. In my mounting delirium, my mother's whimpering sounded almost musical. Sing-song, like a lullaby should whisper sing to me as a child. When I felt my face begin to slide free from my skull, I screamed. But it was altered, distorted as my lips came loose, as my tongue followed in their wake. As if taking on the burden, my mother let out a scream of her own. To me, the world was now no more than a kaleidoscopic maelstrom of images, one of which was my maniacally shrieking mother. The rest of my body fell apart in turn. Bits crumbled away, layers sloughed off, fluids leaked and oozed. When there was finally just my skeleton, held together by strips and stubborn sinew, my father began cleaning up the mess. My mother's mind was pretty much gone. She'd screamed herself senseless. Unable to move, lacking the connective tissues to do so, I just sat and watched as my remains were collected and deposited into a bucket had gotten from beneath my sink. The stuff, the meat, was then slowly poured into the sink. The grinding and gurgling of the garbage disposal as it worked to break up my flesh somehow calmed me. Would have soothed my nerves if I'd still had them. When the deed was done, I lifted my bony hand and placed it gently on the table, and did the same with the other. I could only watch. My eyes hadn't withered away. He then shuffled around the kitchen and, not finding what he was looking for, went searching throughout the apartment. I couldn't guide him, not that I would have. I knew what he was searching for, and the last thing I wanted was for him to find it. But he found it eventually. He set the toolbox and the kitchen table as if it were the most delicate thing in the world. It was old. It had been his, but it was sturdy, and the tools inside hadn't been used once since he'd gifted them to me. With both hands, as if there were precious jewels inside, he raised the lid and removed the hammer and a few nails. He raised the hammer and lowered it and helped my mother out of her chair. He led her to my couch and returned, his expression pained but set. He was ready, no matter how much it would hurt him and me. A nail was placed atop my left hand. The hammer struck once, twice. A second nail was placed in my right hand and was embedded to its head with 3 solid table-shaking strikes. There was somehow pain, and all that was left of me was bone, some flimsy pieces of dead flesh. And somehow I felt it. More than just a vibration. I actually felt the puncturing of the bone, the fracturing of my hand, some phantom skin sensation. Affixed to the table in a seated crucifixion, I was a sinner. Hello, Pony. Thank you so much for the 11 months. Thank you. Nearly a year, yes. I knew that I had every right to be, given what I'd done. But I'd do if I were free. And yet I was terrified, appalled by my father's eyes, by what I had become, by what he'd done to me without so much as a few calming words. The stink of my discarded ground flesh lingered, wafted up from the garbage disposal, the viscera still clinging to the pipes. I wanted to cry, wanted to scream, but I could only stare and suffer. And then the urge came, insidious and powerful. Like a switch had been flipped in my brain, the newly emergent psyche demanding that I perform the unthinkable. It galvanized me, made my bones pulse and quiver. They rattled in place, and I heard my mother moan in fright. My father sat across from me, watching me with a hammer in hand. And I, torn between minds, one terrified, the other unthinking, save for that deplorable impulse, stared back. That abysmal silence returned. Hello, Experience. Thank you so much for the follow and welcome into the channel. When my skin began to grow back, the urge increased by magnitudes. I nearly lost myself completely to that abominable impulse. My parents left around the time that my face finished reconstituting itself. It felt new, so I'm sure it looked incredibly uncanny. Probably more unnerving than the skeleton they'd stared at for nearly an hour. I thought I'd die when the skin formed around my hands, and those new nerves, excited to sense and feel, were unfairly bombarded by the sudden, inexpressibly excruciating sensation of those long nails in my hands. I left my mind fold into myself. I withdrew into an unthinking fugue. Even after I'd finished regenerating, I sat there for 20, 30 minutes, dreading to rip out the nails, to bring even greater agony upon myself. But I had to, and I did. Thank God I didn't have the voice for the pain, that my vocal cords hadn't yet grown taut enough to handle the sonic burden. I would have brought the whole complex running to my door with my screams. I know that my father not done that. I know that had my father not done that, I would have done far worse to someone else. As something worse than a ghoul, as some kind of fleshless revenant. I would have gone on a monstrous prowl, would have seized and devoured someone. Long ago, centuries before my birth, some far distant ancestor committed atrocities against a few fellow townspeople in some long forgotten village, either out of extreme desperation in dire circumstances or simple sadistic gluttony. I never found out why. I just know that he committed terrible anthropophagic crimes, cannibalized multiple people. The people related to those it hurt were so devastated and subsequently filled with wrath that they employed all manner of curses and maledictions, dooming him and his kin forever and ever to unforeseeable and unpreventable malignancies and restrictions, consequences related to the consumption of meat. Not long after, an entire generation was rendered gastrointestinally incompatible with meat. Others down the line had been able to eat and not get full, no matter the quality or content. I don't think I could have lived with that polyphagic plague. Not for long. My family, our consequence, for whatever reason, we cannot eat meat after 6 p.m. lest we shed our flesh and transform into hyper-ravenous fiends. Skeletal nightmares who'd prey and friend, foe, or family in a frenzy of insatiable hunger. Unless we're detained, starved for a period of time, dependent upon factors seemingly beyond our control. For some, it's hours, others days. But the body eventually regenerates, and our humanity afterwards is, for the moment, restored. I'd never succumbed to that despicable, horrific state before. It was the most awful thing that have ever happened to me. Now, no matter the circumstance, I'll never forget the consequence. It's not something I can afford to overlook or gamble with. And that ends our second story for the evening. That one was a little bit more fantastical, I suppose, in its content. Again, it dealt with consequences. Consequences that were far reaching. Beyond the actions of just one man. It was one man who committed this despicable acts, cannibalizing multiple people. And yet, the consequences of those actions not bypassed, but rather carried on to his next generation until our story writer here, they had different forms of consequences that were cursed upon them. And his, I assume it's a his, or he's a his, because he had a girlfriend, was not being able to eat meat past 6 p.m. I don't know if you guys have heard of the before 6 and the after 6 diet. Have you guys heard of that? Where you have to eat before 6 a.m. and you have to eat before 6 p.m. So that's the before 6 and the after 6 diet. You have not? So essentially it's kind of like fasting, really. That would drive me insane. Well, if we are, if you're the kind of person who usually don't really schedule your consumption of food, then having before 6, so it's called a before 6 diet because you have to eat before 6 a.m. and before 6 p.m. So it would, because that would mean that you have 12 hours of fasting, I believe. And that is something that not a lot of people actually can do. It may require you a lot, quite a bit of discipline. But I did try that. Well, not try that, but a different kind of fasting before. But we're not going to talk about fasting because we just read a story about cannibalizing people. Alright, let me just drink another warm water. Also, I do have my my Paperqua candy with me to make sure that my throat is, I don't know, I don't think it's well lubricated, but more of making sure my throat is under control so that it don't turn into that fiend, that revenant that might consume things. Dragon Blade, 501st, 501st, I'm not sure, 51st, I believe. Thank you so much for the follow and welcome in. Okay. The next we have, well, okay, so in order, because my throat is getting a little, So we are going to put our stories from lower our number of stories from 3 more to 2 more. Because the other one, I believe, might be a little too violent. And I don't want you guys to be triggered by it. Avalanched Rose, welcome in. And thank you so much for the follow. Okay. So, our next story is entitled The Secret to Happiness. I think it is but human to seek happiness, to want to be happy. It is something that is innate in us. We seek happiness in many things. We seek happiness from other people. Hello, Ace Vortex. Welcome in. And thank you so much for the follow. So, let us find out in this particular story what was the consequence of finding the secret to happiness was. The secret to happiness. Do you want to know the secret to happiness? The man asking me this question wore a tacky yellow suit and an oversized purple bow tie. He held a small vial out to me as a rehearsed grin stretched across his face. The vial had a smiley face sticker on it and contained a clear yellow liquid. Tap water with some yellow food coloring, if I had to guess. Now I know what you're thinking. Such a wondrous secret can't possibly come cheap. Well, friend, our motto here is pay what you can pay, and we'll chase those clouds away. He punctuated this last bit with a ridiculous soft shoe maneuver, and he held his hands out toward his little cat, loaded high with similar vials. And that cart was a small jar with a sign that said, "Tips." Yes, the 2 exclamation points formed a smiley face. Corny. But I decided that the 87 cents I had in my wallet probably wouldn't be used for anything else. And besides, this fellow had a lot more charisma than some of the other street performers. So he gave me the secret to happiness, and I made him almost $1 richer. A man of discerning taste, he said, as he gave me a deep bow. If you ever need a pick-me-up, know that Smiles Davis always has some spare sunshine. Yes, that's what he called himself. I guess the fact that he was African American himself meant that it wasn't an offensive joke, but still. Another couple walked by, and he turned his attention to them as I quietly excused myself. I placed the vial in my medicine cabinet and promptly forgot about it. A few days later, after taking my trash out to the side of the road, I ran into my longtime neighbor, Josh. Usually reclusive, he stopped me on my way back into my apartment and made some short, friendly conversation. I don't remember what it was about, but it was more words than I exchanged with him in 3 years of living next door. Afterwards, he wished me a good morning and ran off to his car. I assumed he was just having a rare good day. But then I noticed that at the top of his recycling bin was a familiar glass vial with a smiley face sticker. I saw those stickers more and more as the weeks went on. At first, they just appeared in more trash bags around my block. But soon I began noticing coworkers chatting as they poured the yellow liquid into their morning coffee. Eventually, I began seeing absolute strangers who lived several blocks away from my part of the town with these vials in their hands. And they always gave me a wide, toothy smile and wave. If they weren't already engaged in animated conversation with somebody else. Most every day I would pass by Smile Davis's cart, and a large band of somewhat familiar faces would be gathered around, sharing jokes, talking with him. These were people I knew from the neighborhood. A couple of co-workers, and occasionally my once reclusive neighbor. And Smiles would be standing in the middle, slinging puns and vials with equal abandon. Careful, everybody. I don't think this cart is prepared to travel at 100 miles per hour. They all laughed, almost in unison at that, I guess you could call it, joke. Smiles performed a little dance in response. More vials were handed to the crowd, and more money was handed to Smiles. Much of it being significantly greater than the already generous 87 cents I had given him. Conversing with Josh had become an almost weekly occurrence as well. I never discussed anything of substance, but once in a while I asked about Smiles. Josh never said much, except what a fun addition he was to the neighborhood. When I asked if he'd ever taken one of the men's vials, Josh laughed and said, of course. He needed to start his day off right, thank you very much. Here was a man who had rarely come out of his own apartment in the 3 years I'd known him, now regularly joking with complete strangers and paying for yellow tap water as a pick-me-up. Whatever Smiles was doing, it was working. One day, as I was walking through that same area of town and the way back from work, many of Smiles' throng were beginning to head home, but not all of them. I noticed one older woman hanging back from the cart as the others left. I'd seen her before. She was the recent widow of some old money real estate hotshot. Her hobbies included scowling and bitching at my coworkers for parking too close to some of her husband's properties. Hello, Alexis. You have come out of your lurk. Once most of the others were gone, this woman approached Smiles, and the two began speaking in hushed tones, very close together. I couldn't tell what they were talking about, but at one point, she wiped her eyes with her handkerchief as he put his arm around her shoulders and handed her one of his vials. She drank it and then immediately handed him something that looked like a check. Smiles looked at it and started to give it back. The woman insisted. I know you were. In fact, you time to lurk, did you not? But you have come out of your lurk, is what I was saying. The woman insisted. Another short, intimate conversation, and Smiles placed the check in his tips jar. The two hugged, and the older woman went on her way as Smiles began doing some inventory. Hushed tones were not the way of the street performer, and I had never seen Smiles turn down a payment. Looking as casual as I could, I approached the carte blanche. Again, yes, that's what it called it. Smiles was too engaged in filling out various forms to accost me with his usual shtick. "How's business?" I asked. Smiles jumped a little before turning to me. There was a temporary moment where he transitioned from the man handling the money to the character handling the product. But the same grin spread across his face. "Just poppin'," he replied. "Where there's a will, there's a way, is what I always say." It must not be easy, standing out here all day in that suit. Doesn't it get hot? Oh, the heat I don't mind so much. Especially recently when I've been too engaged with customers most of the time to really notice it. Plus, I've got plenty here to keep me hydrated, he said, gesturing toward the vials. Yeah, I've noticed a lot of people here. You've gathered quite the fan base. Yes, he said, looking out into the nearly empty street. The sun was just starting to set, and most businesses were closing up around this time. It's a wonderful feeling, changing so many lives. Changing lives? He chuckled. Well, of course. This little vial can change a frown into a smile. He squinted his eyes at me and picked up another container. Can I interest you in one? Maybe later. I didn't bring my wallet with me today, I lied. Tell you what, pal, he said, holding the bottle closer to my face. I'm in an exceptionally good mood, so I'm going to give you an exclusive offer. Today only. It's on the house. After all, when you're feeling happy, the only thing to do is share the joy. I would, but I thought quickly. I still have one at home that I haven't tried yet. Wouldn't want to waste it. His smile faltered slightly, and he kept his arm extended for just a second too long. But he ultimately took it back and placed it in his inventory. All things in moderation, he said. Very wise. Hello, Nexel. Thank you so much for the follow. Welcome in, welcome in. I stood very still for a bit, trying to think of ways to carry on the conversation. Say, could you do me a favor? He asked. A pause. What sort of favor? Hello, Sir Zealot. Thank you for the 39 bites. I hope you're doing well. Could you watch my cart for a second? I just need to step into that store over there and relieve myself of the consequences of hydration, if you catch my meaning, he said, winking. Oh, yeah, sure. He thanked me and jogged away into a nearby convenience store. I waited until the store's bell informed me that he had entered the building, and then I went for the tip jar. Most of the bills in there were of a surprisingly high amount, more $10 and $20 than $1. Many of the bills also had little notes or smiley faces drawn onto them in Sharpie. Notes like, "Have an excellent day," or "Turn that frown upside down." I took the check off the top, and I felt my mouth fall open when I saw the amount. $10,000, payable to a Mr. Ronald Bueller, with small smiley faces in each one of the zeros. I took a moment to process this before placing the check back in the jar. I scanned my surroundings. The square was mostly empty as I rushed to the other side of the cart and started going through some of the papers he had been writing. Most of them seemed to be order forms for more jars and stickers and food coloring. I continued leafing through them, but I didn't see anything that indicated some sort of other ingredient he may have needed to order. Maybe he didn't risk having something like that out in public. It wasn't long before I heard the bell of the convenience store chime again. I ducked back to the other side of the cart as he approached. He thanked me warmly for the assistance as I started to walk away empty-handed. "Oh, and stranger," he called out. I turned. "Make sure to try some of this stuff. We'd all love to have you in the community," he winked. I watched him like a hawk for the next week, trying to see if I could piece together what he was doing to these drinks. It was hard to believe that there was anything in them but tap water and food coloring, but I kept an eye out to see if he ever added anything to the vials, or if any of his performances seemed ritualistic in some way. I could never quite find out how he did it, but I could see the effects. The small congregation that followed him in the square only increased in size, at one point large enough that it practically blocked the nearby road. I started searching through neighbors' trash bins, almost always to find at least one of the vials. But some houses had 2 or 3. Not only my neighbor, but several co-workers who had never spoken to me in the past started greeting me enthusiastically each day, all with a similar cartoonish grin across their face. All the while, Smiles Davis kept making money. "Hello, love Delphi. Welcome in." Cass Xavier, thank you so much for the follow and welcome in. All the while, Smiles Davis kept making money. Big money. I don't know if that same woman ever gave him any more checks, but his crowds certainly continued to fill his tips with large bills and small notes. And on days when there was a large enough crowd, Smiles started working a call and response into his daily bits. "How are we feeling today?" he would cry. "Happy," the mob would roar. "And what do we do when we're feeling happy?" he would ask. "Share the joy," they would chant. "Share the joy. Share the joy." The first time I heard them chanting is when I decided to take matters into my own hands. Even though marijuana is still illegal in the state where I live, all it took was a couple of calls to some old college acquaintances to get my hands on an incriminating amount. One more favor of watching Smiles' cart for him was all it took to stash it in his property. And one anonymous tip that a certain street performer was selling drugs on the side was all it took to ensure the police got involved. Smiles noticed me in the crowd on the day that they took action. He gave me his same unnerving grin and said, "Looks like we finally got you to join the fun." I returned his smile. What can I say? I just have a feeling that it's going to be a particularly good day. Smiles only made it a couple of minutes into his bit before the cop cars pulled up. There were plenty of "There must be some mistake, officer," from Smiles, and plenty of boos from the masses. Until, of course, the offending substance was found in the carte blanche. The mob kept their silence as their leader was placed into handcuffs and taken into police custody. The change in the town was almost immediate. The vials stopped appearing in trash cans, the crowd stopped assembling in the town square, and my co-workers' smiles faded back into the indifferent grimace of minimum wage employment. The conversations between Josh and I stopped as well. One day I tried asking how his day was, but he offered me little more than a shrug. I stopped asking after that and just waited for him to offer conversation himself. He still hasn't. I read in the newspaper that Ronald Bueller, aka Smiles Davis, was sentenced to a year in jail with a pretty hefty fine levied against him and no opportunity for bail. Apparently, Ronald had been caught with marijuana before, and I'm sure his race did not do him any favors. I felt a little guilty after reading that. Sure, it was probably for the best, but I wound up spending a lot of time alone in my room, wondering if I'd made the right call. After all, he had made people happy. But if he was altering them somehow with his vials as part of a money-making scheme, that still made him a threat, right? After many more nights of doubts, I decided there was only one way to find out. I opened the door to my medicine cabinet and found the one vial that was still left smiling back at me. I looked at the yellow liquid for a long time. It wasn't cloudy. No bubbles indicate some sort of carbonation either. I took off the top and smelled it. No discernible odor. I thought about Josh and his indifferent shrug. I thought about my increasingly distant coworkers, and I thought about the man I had sent to jail. I drank the entire bottle. Do you know what happiness tastes like? It tastes like tap water with some yellow food coloring. And that ends our, what is it? Third story for the evening of Smiles and his vials of happiness. What do you think he did? Was it some kind of a placebo effect? Was there really nothing in that small little vial of tap water and yellow food coloring? Or was it the man himself that caused the people who bought the vials to suddenly somehow become happy? Schizophrenia. Or mass hysteria. Because as the story stated, it was not just one person, right? It was essentially a whole entire neighborhood, not just in the place where he lived, but from other neighborhoods as well. So they're kind of suffering a mass hysteria, suffering a similar delusion. I don't really know. But I do know that the people who bought those little vials were all looking for one thing. They were looking for happiness, and they thought that they could find the cure or the secret to happiness in that tiny little vial. And perhaps Smiles is the greatest salesman of all because he was able to essentially bring happiness, whether that happiness is manufactured or real. We will never know, because Smiles got imprisoned with no possibility of parole. I guess we'll find out years later down the line if he ever decides to continue his business. Hello, Love Delphi. Welcome in, welcome in. Okay, so let me just drink some water. It is now 10:33 p.m. One hell of a cliffhanger indeed. You sure you're doing okay? I am still doing okay. Worry not. Our last story for the evening is called The Last Leaf. This is another classic story. This story is more about selfless love and sacrifice. Choosing to do something in order to bring happiness to somebody else. At the, well, fortunately, with this story, to their own detriment. So, let us begin. Our last story for the evening. The Last Leaf. Wait, I forgot who is the O. Henry. Again, this is another This is another classical story that I studied back in college. We were studying literature. I love red. Well, as you can see, love Delphi. If you allow yourself to be bitten, then you will definitely see more red. DXR Keyed. Thank you so much for the follow and welcome in. In a small part of the city, west of Washington Square, the streets have gone wild. They turn in different directions. They are broken into small pieces called places. One street goes across itself 1 or 2 times. A painter once discovered something possible and valuable about this street. Suppose the painter had some painting materials for which he had not paid. Suppose he had no money. Suppose a man came to get the money. The man might walk down the street and suddenly meet himself coming back without having received a cent. This part of the city is called Greenwich Village. And to old Greenwich Village, the painters soon came. Alrighty, Luxus, thank you so much for staying as long as you have. Do take care, alright? Here they found rooms that they like, with good light and at a low cost. Sue and Johnsy lived at the top of a building with 3 floors. One of these young women came from Maine, the other from California. They had met at a restaurant on 8th Street. There they discovered that they liked the same kind of art, the same kind of food, and the same kind of clothes. So they decided to live and work together. That was in the spring. Toward winter, a cold stranger entered Greenwich Village. No one could see him. He walked around touching one person here and another there with his icy fingers. He was a bad sickness. Doctors called him pneumonia. On the east side of the city he hurried, touching many people. But in the narrow streets of Greenwich Village he did not move so quickly. Mr. Pneumonia was not a nice old gentleman. A nice old gentleman would not hurt a weak little woman from California. But Mr. Pneumonia touched Johnsy with his cold fingers. She lay in her bed almost without moving, and she looked through the window at the wall of the house next to hers. One morning, the busy doctor spoke to Sue alone in the hall, where Johnsy could not hear. "She has a very small chance," he said. "She has a chance if she wants to live. If people don't want to live, I can't do much for them. Your little lady has decided that she is not going to get well. Is there something that is troubling her?" "She always wanted to go to Italy and paint a picture of the Bay of Naples," said Sue. "Paint, not paint. Is there anything worth being troubled about? A man?" "A man," said Sue. "Is a man worth—" "No, doctor, there is not a man." "It is weakness," said the doctor. "I will do all I know how to do. When a sick person begins to feel that he's going to die, half my work is useless. Talk to her about new winter clothes. If she were interested in the future, her chances would be better. After the doctor had gone, Sue went into the workroom to cry. Then she walked into Johnsie's room. She carried some of her painting materials, and she was singing. Johnsie lay there, very thin and very quiet. Her face was turned toward the window. Sue stopped singing, thinking that Johnsie was asleep. Sue began to work. As she worked, she heard a low sound, again and again. She went quickly to the bedside. Johnsie's eyes were wide open. She was looking out the window and counting back. 12, she said. And a little later, 11, and then 10, and 9, and then 8, and 7, almost together. Sue looked out the window. What was there to count? There was only the side wall of the next house, a short distance away. The wall had no window. An old tree grew against the wall. The cold breath of winter had already touched it. Almost all its leaves had fallen from its dark branches. "What is it, dear?" asked Sue. 6, said Johnsie, in a voice still lower. "They're falling faster now. 3 days ago they were almost 100. It hurt my head to count them. But now it's easy. There goes another one. There are only 5 now." "5 what, dear? Tell your Sue." "Leaves on the tree. When the last one falls, I must go too. I've known that for 3 days. Didn't the doctor tell you?" "Oh, I never heard of such a thing," said Sue. "It doesn't have any sense in it. What does an old tree have to do with you, or with you getting well? And you used to love that tree so much. Don't be a little fool. The doctor told me your chances for getting well. He told me this morning. He said you had very good chances. Try to eat a little now, and then I'll go back to work, and then I can sell my picture, and then I can buy something more for you to eat to make you strong." "You don't have to buy anything for me," said Johnsie. She still looked out the window. "There goes another. No, I don't want anything to eat. Now there are 4. I want to see the last one fall before night. Then I'll go too." "Johnsie, dear," said Sue, "will you promise me to close your eyes and keep them closed? Will you promise not to look out the window until I finish working? I must have this picture ready tomorrow. I need the light. I can't cover the window." "Couldn't you work in the other room?" asked Johnsie coldly. "I'd rather be here by you," said Sue. "And I don't want you to look at those leaves." "Tell me as soon as you have finished," said Johnsie. She closed her eyes and lay white and still. "Because I want to see the last leaf fall. I've done enough waiting. I've done enough thinking. I want to go sailing down like one of those leaves. Try to sleep, said Sue. I must call Berman to come up here. I want to paint a man in this picture, and I'll make him look like Berman. I won't be gone a minute. Don't try to move till I come back. Old Berman was a painter who lived on the first floor of their house. He was past 60. He had no success as a painter. For 40 years he had painted without ever painting a good picture. He had always talked of painting a great picture, a masterpiece, but he had never yet started it. He got a little money by letting others paint pictures of him. He drank too much. He still talked of his great masterpiece, and he believed that it was his special duty to do everything possible to help Sue and Johnsy. She found him in his dark room, and she knew that he had been drinking. She could smell it. And she told him about Johnsy and the leaves and the vine. She said that she was afraid that Johnsy would indeed sail down like the leaf. Her hold on the world was growing weaker. Old Berman shouted his anger over such an idea. "What?" he cried. "Are there such fools? Do people die because leaves drop off a tree? I have not heard of such a thing. No, I will not come up and sit while you make a picture of me. Why do you allow her to think such a thing? That poor little Johnsy." "She is very sick and weak," said Sue. "The sickness has put these strange ideas into her mind, Mr. Berman. If you won't come, you won't, but I don't think you're very nice." "This is like a woman," shouted Berman. "Who said I will not come? Go, I come with you. For half an hour I have been trying to say that I will come. God, this is not any place for someone so good as Johnsy to lie sick. Some day I shall paint my masterpiece and we shall all go away from here. God, yes." Johnsy was sleeping when they went up. Sue covered the window and took Berman into the other room. There they looked out the window fearfully at the tree. Then they looked at each other for a moment without speaking. A cold rain was falling, with a little snow in it too. Berman sat down and Sue began to paint. She worked through most of the night. In the morning, after an hour's sleep, she went to Johnsy's bedside. Johnsy, with wide open eyes, was looking toward the window. "I want to see," she told Sue. She took the cover from the window. But after the beating rain and the wild wind that had not stopped through the whole night, there still was one leaf to be seen against the wall. It was the last on the tree. It was still dark green near the branch, but at the edges it was turning yellow with age. There it was, hanging from a branch nearly 20 feet above the ground. "It is the last one," said Johnsy. "I thought it would surely fall during the night. I heard the wind. It will fall today, and I shall die at the same time." "Dear, Dear Johnsy, said Sue, think of me. If you won't think of yourself, what would I do? But Johnsy did not answer. The most lonely thing in the world is a soul when it is preparing to go on its far journey. The ties that held her to friendship and to earth were breaking, one by one. The day slowly passed. As it grew dark, they could still see the leaf hanging from its branch against the wall. And then, as the night came, the north wind began again to blow. The rain still beat against the windows. When it was light enough the next morning, Johnsy again commanded that she be allowed to see. The leaf was still there. Johnsy lay for a long time looking at it. And then she called to Sue, who was cooking something for her to eat. I've been a bad girl, Sue, said Johnsy. Something has made that last leaf stay there to show me how bad I was. It is wrong to want to die. I'll try to eat now, but first bring me a looking glass so that I can see myself, and then I'll sit up and watch you cook. An hour later she said, Sue, someday I hope to paint the Bay of Naples. The doctor came in the afternoon. Sue followed him into the hall outside Johnsy's room to talk to him. The chances are good, said the doctor. He took Sue's thin, shaking hand in his. Give her good care, and she'll get well. And now I must see another sick person in this house. His name is Berman, a painter, I believe. Pneumonia, too. Mike is an old, weak man, and he is very ill. There's no hope for him, but we take him to the hospital today. We'll make it as easy for him as we can. The next day, the doctor said to Sue, She's safe. You have done it. Food and care now. That's all. And that afternoon, Sue came to the bed where Johnsy lay. She put one arm around her. I have something to tell you, she said. Mr. Berman died of pneumonia today in the hospital. He was ill only 2 days. Someone found him on the morning of the first day in his room. He was helpless with pain. His shoes and his clothes were wet and as cold as ice. Everyone wondered where he had been. The night had been so cold and wild. And then they found some things. There was a light that he had taken outside, and there were his materials for painting. There was paint, green paint and yellow paint, and look out the window, dear, at the last leaf on the wall. Didn't you wonder why it never moved when the wind was blowing? Oh, my dear, it is Berman's great masterpiece. He painted it there the night that the last leaf fell. And that is our last story for this evening. It's called The Last Leaf. this particular story was about making choices. Two choices were made, actually. One was from Johnsy, when she decided that her life was going to end together with the leaves outside her window. And then deciding later on that maybe life wasn't so bad after all if the leaf stayed and clung to that tree, even after all the rain and the wind and the storm. But little did she know that the consequences of her getting back her will to live, it was that of another person sacrificing themselves. And that was the old painter, Mr. Berman. And he chose to go out into the night carrying a little lamp and painting the last leaf on the tree so that Johnsy wouldn't give up. And I think that is a very poignant and, albeit a sad ending, for Mr. Berman. But it made Johnsy want to live. And that, my dear garlic heads, is our last story for the evening. I hope that you guys enjoyed the story, whether it is the morbid ones, the fantastical ones, the, I don't really know, the hallucinatory ones, and of course the more poignant ones about the stories that deal with choices and consequences. I hope that all of those made a deep and lasting impression. Maybe not all of them, but hopefully gave you something to ponder about as you go about the rest of your day. Or if you're like me, as you head off into the night. Now, let us see if there is anyone we can raid before we head off. Let me see. Is there anyone you guys would like to raid, by the way? These will be memorable. I might have to come back and listen to them again. It's okay. Not all the stories have to, like, leave an, what was the word I learned today? Indelible mark on you. But I hope that with all the stories that you listen to, that your Oneesama reads for you guys, some of them will stay with you and leave a lasting impression on you. Okay, so we have somebody that we can raid. Her name is, let me just mute. Oh no. Her name is Zio. She is a lion VTuber actually. And her stream is not going to be ASMR, just so you guys know. So, if you wish to go to another ASMR channel, you're more than welcome to do so, okay? So the channel's name is, well, FZ Zio. So let us prepare our raid for her, shall we? Alright, there we go. So thank you once again, everyone, for listening to your Oneesama stories for this evening, for staying with me until the end of the stream. A big thank you as well to those who dropped follows, and of course to those who resubbed. I really appreciate your support, whether it's with the subs or the follows or the interaction. I very much appreciate it, and I am forever deeply grateful for you guys' support. So I do my best to be able to entertain you, even with my little stories, and of course my not so good gameplay. Anyways, I will see you guys on my next stream, whenever that will be. And as always, keep safe. This is your vampire Oneesama, Sister Midnight, signing off. Good night, everyone. Let's go raid.